Welcome back to I Got Board
I got board
Game.
game.
I got board game. I am Ben,
I'm John.
and today we are here for our first top 10 video of 2022.
Yes.
That is right.
Ever.
Okay. But this time we are doing a video we did for the first time last year. This time it is our top 10 games we played in 2021. So top 10 games we played last year. And so the important thing to keep in mind with this game, and this is something that John and I had agreed on when going into making our own lists. First, we don't know each other's lists, so we're gonna get on each other's cases real bad in this video. Now, the main thing we agreed on was that this isn't a list of like our top overall games that we just happened to play last year. You know, it's not like this is not just like top 10 of all time. Oh yeah, and we happen to play it. Right. This is more based on our actual experiences of these games from specifically 2021. And so that's kind of what we both agreed upon. And then, I guess we'll go into sharing a little more of if there were other thoughts with the process we went through. Like for me, and I know when we do these lists, we use PubMeeple, which is a ranking engine online, really useful. You just kind of type in the game and it searches it up from Board Game Geek for you, and you add it to like a list that you're making. And then you can run these rankings where you just compare two games and choose which one you are putting above the other one. And then you do all these comparisons, and then it makes your list for you for however many games you populate it with. Mm-hmm. And so we both use that system. Yep. And for me, I was telling John, I actually ran it through the system twice. Like I pulled up all the games I had recorded playing in 2021 on Board Game Geek, put it in, made the list, ran it twice, and both times the top 7 actually were the same, exactly the same position in games. And so that's pretty consistent feeling. The first time was when I was doing it with like kind of more thinking, taking my time to really be like, oh, which of these games did I actually like more, or do I think are more fun, or I had a better experience with? And then the second time, I just wanted to kind of check it. So I did it as fast as I could, just kind of reaction. When I see two games, just like, which one would I choose over the other? But yeah, it happened to be the top 7 would be the same. And then I would go back and do some editing, primarily with like number 7 through 10, to kind of be like, I think maybe I was biased and maybe thinking like, comparing the games based on like my overall rating of the game. And so I'd have to try to think back of like, what is my actual memory of playing that game last year? And so I think the games lower on my list are ones that either didn't have like the most impactful experiences of playing, or even like my memory of it was kind of not that strong. Like maybe I played it once, I remember some of the experience, but you know, it was kind of telling that I couldn't remember necessarily who I played it with or stuff like that, you know? So then it would kind of be fitting that it's at the bottom there. And so, yeah, so those are kind of the thoughts that I had when going into it, mainly trying to make sure I focus on that it's like my experience and sensations when I played it this past year.
Yeah, and for me, I think I had a similar thought process when I was thinking about these games. Mine will probably be a little bit different than yours, Ben. I actually probably have a few more solo games that I've done, so this will also be interesting. But as I added those solo game experiences, I was thinking about the possibility of, do I really think, or would this be a game that I would have also wanted to play with a bunch of people? And when I was thinking about it, it was both a combination of the experience I had playing the game, but also the desire of coming back to the game again was an additional criteria that I had, where there were some games that I played that I enjoyed and I had fun with, but I also thought like, is this a game that I would really honestly want to revisit more and more? Because for me, that would be something that I would rate as a very top game in my experience, or that experience of desiring that kind of experience that I had in playing the game, wanting to do that again and again and again. right?
Mm,
And
mhm,
that's
mhm.
for me to make it more than just a best game of all time, because there are some games like we've played in the past, like Time Stories, that you really can only play it once. You can't play it more than one, but that would be a really highly rated game. But to kind of make it a little bit different for this, so these are the top 10
Okay.
games I think of that I'm coming back to, or I had a great experience, and that's the kind of experience I would want to have again.
Mm.
So
And then I don't know if this is true for your list too, but I
mhm.
just remembered that part of my process was also realizing that like the top game in my list here is not the game I played the most.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because I think it comes down to more of like, even if it's like a single experience of like just how memorable, funny it was compared to like a game that I just happened to have time and interest to try a lot. And it might have been great, but you know, it doesn't compare to even just like that one time.
Yeah. Well,
So
that in that sense of that hopefully was not affecting our expectations, right? As we put it into the game, where we're thinking more experiential, or like the sessions that we've been playing
mhm,
versus
mhm.
not
Yeah.
just like replayability is not the criteria per se,
Mhm, mhm,
right?
mhm,
Or the fact that you can play it a lot of times.
mhm, mhm.
So
Okay, yeah. I just want to point that out too then.
mhm,
So
mhm.
and so then we will just get into our list. So top 10 games we played in 2021.
2021.
And actually, before we
COVID.
even start with number 10, always cheating on these lists, we will start with our runner up,
Mhm.
our honorable mention,
Yeah.
our short list, however you want to call it, our basically our number 11, the one that didn't quite make it, but we do kind of want to mention. So, John, you're.
Yeah. So for me, the game that I had, let me pull up my image of it, is one that you've probably heard us talk about many different times in all kinds of different settings. But my game is Splendor. So
Mm,
specifically for this one, it did make my top 10 list this year. But I did want to make an honorable mention of it, especially because this year is the first year I actually got to play it with my nephew for the first time. So my nephew's finally old enough, yes, at an age in which I can teach him and have started to teach him some new games of board games where it's not just like your Monopoly or kind of your very kid focused friendly games of like very simple with not a lot of stuff like Don't Break the Ice and stuff like that. Those very tactile games, or like very maybe like dexterity based, but not a lot of thinking typically involved with them, or it's just like dice rolling and it's just whatever luck happens, like Monopoly. So I had taught him two games. I've taught him to Catan and I've taught him Splendor. So I like Splendor a lot more than I like Catan, but he really enjoyed this to the point that when after I played it with him, this was before Christmas, he actually asked for this game, Splendor, on Christmas for as a part of his Christmas list of games he wanted. So he got it as well. So we got to play it a few times over the Christmas holidays too. So kind of like having that experience of playing with him for the first time and just really getting into the world and the spirit of board games. Woo! So that's why this is my honorable mention.
that's cute. Your nephew getting a shout out here.
Mhm.
If he watches this.
Yeah, he does not watch this. We
Oh,
talk too
well,
much.
maybe he'll watch it like in the future when he's much older. So my number 11 is a game that, and there were actually a few of these games that I got to try later in the year. And so they were kind of in this category where I feel like I didn't play them enough to like do a review of them. And so my thoughts are still kind of like need to be formed on them. But then they still kind of stuck out to me. And so then the one that caught my attention the most and even has that feeling that you described of like wanting to get back to it is this game called That Time You Killed Me,
Mhm.
which is a pretty big box for an abstract two-player game
Mhm.
with it's kind of designed around the theme of time travel, and you're basically two people who claim to have invented time travel, and so the only way to settle it is to time travel and try to take out the other person, so then whoever's left is actually the one who invented time travel. And so just the idea I thought is pretty funny. But then actually playing it, it's like an abstract game where you have the 3 different boards that are the past, present, and future, and you can basically on your turn move your pawn either on those on a single board to try to push your opponent into like a wall to kill them. Or you can try to time travel and move a piece to the past, and leaving a copy of yourself in that future timeline, or move to the future and you're just basically trying to maneuver around to be the last one standing. And there's modules to it that add different things, but I've only tried the first module. But I just still remember playing it for the first time with my relatives and like just sitting down looking at this abstract game, and I could like already feel like my heart like kind of like racing a bit, like, oh, this is exciting. This is kind of like simple kind of chess checkers looking game, but it's just the idea of the time traveling and trying to figure out like different things you can try to pull off to outwit your opponent. And so yeah, that really caught my attention, and I'm definitely curious to try it more. And so that's my number 11.
Very nice.
And so then getting onto our actual top 10 list, starting with
number 10.
Number 10. 10. So you're number 10, John?
Yeah. So starting off with mine, this is a bit of an older game, but we got an experience to try it out before Omicron started kicking in and stuff. We had an opportunity to get together, and it's a game that I enjoyed a lot. And it's been a long time since we went back to it, but the game is Paperback. Woo! So by Tim Flowers or Fowers. So Paperback is a deck building game, but the premise of this deck building game is that you're actually constructing words from the deck of cards that you have. So it'll be kind of like a standard deck builder. You start out with a deck of 10 cards, but of those cards, you'll have some wild cards, and then you'll have cards that have a letter on it, and they're associated with a number value. So when you play your hand, unlike traditional deck builders, in this game, you actually have to spell out a word and utilize the amount of money that you make out of the word you spell to then have purchasing power to add more cards into your deck. So different cards you can add typically are cards that add more letters into your deck. So normally you start out with like some of the basic letters of like R, S, L, and like the stuff you see in like Wheel of Fortune and all.
Yeah, R, S, T, L,
right?
N, E.
R, S, T, L. And then you have your wild cards that can count for any letters, but don't give you money. And so basically the objective of the game is you're trying to buy cards that you can kind of see it in my image here, but it's basically a book, which counts as points at the end of the game. And basically those books are, as you're spelling out these words and building up your deck, the thematically is like you're typing out and creating a book, and then you add them into your deck. So by the end of the game, you want to have the most points because you've in effect likely created the most books or made the most, famous novelizations and such. So Paperback's a great game. I love deck builders in general, but it throws in this unique kind of aspect of you're not just playing cards out of your hand, but you're actually spelling words. So it has that fun kind of Scrabbly feel or bananagrams feel where you actually have to think of words that you want to put together. And it's not just like you get any letters, you have to draw from your deck. So based on how many types of letters you're putting into your deck, as you're drawing them, you're going to have to start thinking of new words or ways of putting your words together to try to get, be able to win the game. So I love this game. I don't own it myself, but we got to play it when Ben brought it over for us to play. I got to play with some new people who hadn't played the game before, and it was just great to kind of dive back into an old game that I remember loving a lot in the past, and just being like, man, this is a really solid game. So yeah, so that is my number 10.
And so my number 10 is a game that I did not play with John. I had to check with him before this, so I think maybe spoiled that for him, that he might know what my number 10 is. But my number 10 is a really well-known game in the industry, and that is Root.
Yeah, you still haven't played it with me again.
Yeah, I remember because yeah, I don't want you to play it. And so I played it with other people, and I'm trying to remember who. I'm sorry if I played it. I feel like it was my cousin, but that might also be wrong because the chances of that are pretty low. Yeah, who was it? Was it Matthew? Matthew, if you're watching this and I played this with you, please remind me. That doesn't sound right either though. But anyways, I do remember though getting to play Root because I think it was the first time I might have gotten to experience the Woodland Alliance, one of the factions in the game, because this game is essentially a war game or like animal themed, cute looking but vicious war game. And it's most well known for being asymmetrical, basically a game where each player, after choosing their faction, they'll play differently from each other, and not just in strategy, but the actual mechanisms and their turn order and how they use the cards are different from each other. And so that's why the game has always kind of been known for being difficult to teach, because you essentially have to teach each faction and how they play differently to each player that you're playing with. But then that's also what makes it so unique, that you have an asymmetrical game, each faction that plays differently and yet are feel balanced, or are part of the same battle that's happening. And so yeah, I didn't try, I don't think, the Woodland Alliance myself, but I played against it, meaning I had to teach someone how to play it. And so kind of learning that way and seeing what they can do was really interesting. I might have played it actually, now that I think about it. Anyways, but part of the excitement and why it's on the list, but why it's also number 10 is what I was mentioning. Like, I don't exactly remember the playthrough itself, but I remember the feeling when I got into it. Like after setting it up, having my hand of cards, and we start maybe just like one round in, I'm like, oh man, I missed this game. Like that, I remember that feeling. And so it's really just those kind of mechanisms that really brings out that feeling, and seeing everything set up again. It's like, okay, we committed to playing this and kind of learning each role again. It's like, okay, but yeah, this is going to be cool, and trying to see like what people do differently and how am I supposed to play against that. And so yes, that is Root by Leder Games, which I believe came out in, I'm going to try to share these so you guys have an idea. It came out in 2018, I believe, and it has like a few expansions too, which I have, if you notice sometimes over here in the back of my videos. But yes, my number 10, Root.
And sorry, just to really quickly go back, Paperback was also released back in 2014. So that was the year of release for Paperback. So
Yeah.
it is quite an older game.
So, which is a good sign that it's even on a list still like this.
Yeah. But yeah, Ben, we really do need to play it, right? You love the experience.
I mean, you have Root now, right?
Okay.
That's what you
true.
mentioned.
I did get it myself, so now I can find other people also.
That means, but that also means you can learn it first. So that me, I don't have to take time to teach it.
That is also true. Moving on.
Going on to number 9. 9.
But yes, so number 9 game actually is an even older game than Paperback, and I actually got to play this with my siblings on Tabletop Simulator. So I own multiple copies, or not multiple copies, I own copies of this game and such. But the game that I played and is in my number 9 is Race for the Galaxy. So it was kind of surprising, because I remember playing this game when I was in college. I picked it up just on a whim of, I was just looking around for a game. It seemed like it was a pretty cool game set in space. And I remember first trying to learn the game, and it was really difficult to learn because I was literally trying to figure it out all by myself. But once I did figure out how to play the game and I started playing with other people, we played for hours this game over and over again. It was this game and Dominion that we played a million times. But coming back to this game again, much later, and it's been many years since I had played a lot of this, it's a really, really well made and it's a really solid game. So effectively what you're doing in this game is when you play the game, you have a set of cards in your hand that you get to choose a certain turn that happens. So each turn has 5 potential phases that can happen in a turn, and each player gets to choose which phase they want to happen. And so it can be something like exploratory phase, which is getting more cards. There's a settlement phase, which is finding planets to either settle on or to conquer. There's a development phase, which is building up special kind of development cards. And then there's a trading phase that gets you more cards in your hand, as well as a victory points scoring phase. And then there's the production phase, which allows you to get these resources that you're allowed to trade based on the planets that you have. So the Race for the Galaxy game, it has multiple expansions, but just remembering the feeling of having to, not really in a social deduction style of game, but you are kind of thinking about what is it that my, maybe potential, my competitors might want to choose to do in their turn, where when you select a phase, you gain a special bonus. But if you're not selecting the phase, you still get to do that phase of activities. So it's kind of this balance of what is, if I believe that my opponents are going to be doing certain things, maybe I can tag on to their, choice of actions and then do something else that's going to benefit me in the long run. So you kind of get this little bit of kind of figuring out and trying to deduce or trying to interpret what other players are trying to aim for, yet at the same time also needing to further your own advancements for your sake so that you can win the game. Race for the Galaxy, as I mentioned, has a number of other expansions that include things that start allowing you to like fight other players to try to steal planets from them, or you can also try to win through a military victory versus just the normal point scoring. Things like that. So there's a lot of different modules that you can add into the game, but it was really great for me to kind of come back to it. Also because I was playing with my siblings who tend to be a little bit more min-maxers and hardcore like I am in terms of gameplay. So having to actually pit myself against like-minded siblings who are trying to one-up each other and take advantage of each other. It was just a really great experience to come back into this. And it was nice to remember, like this was still a really solid game. Decided being released in 2007.
Wow.
So
yeah, no,
Race
it is a game that I've also, I think, heard again recently on one of the Dice Tower Top 100 lists. Yeah, I think they still enjoy the game, even though it is older, but I think they point it out as one of those kind of landmark designs from that designer. And so my number 9 is a game that I was quite certain it had to be on this list just because I've been teaching the game so much to people. And I even mentioned it a few times to John that when we did our stocking stuffer list, I think this game would have made it on there if I had played it at that time, but I hadn't played it yet. Even though it's a game that it came out in 2019, I only decided to give it a chance this past year, end of the year, and that game is Ohanami. Ohanami, which means flower viewing in Japanese, and it's essentially this game where it's a drafting game, and each player is trying to draft cards to create their own gardens, which are basically their 3 columns of cards that they get to have. But then the trick is you're drafting 2 cards each turn, but then each card has a number on it, and you have to, you can only add cards to your gardens by either decreasing the number or increasing the number. So adding upward or downward, but never inserting cards in between numbers you already took before. And so that's kind of like the limitation. But then aside from that, yeah, it's a drafting game. And I think that kind of combines things that I like in a lightweight game like this, because you can see it's a small box game, a filler game. And as much as I always describe it or introduce it to people as this theme of flower viewing and making your gardens with, plant cards and water features, it is ultimately an abstract game. You're trying to just get the right numbers, and they'll, at the end of each round, there's only 3 rounds. At the end of each round, you score different features. That's basically the game. But I think, like I was mentioning, it has both drafting, which I think I always like as kind of a main mechanic in a small game. I don't like it as much when it's just like a small mechanic in a big game. But I think in a filler game, if it is drafting and that's the main thing, I do like that feeling because it's fast. Everyone's playing at the same time. So, there's not much of that waiting around. And then there's always that kind of funny banter that can happen because you get to see all the cards that are being passed around while you're drafting. And so you kind of get on each other's case, like, don't you dare take, what I think. Or it's like, I hope you enjoy this hand that's coming to you because it's gonna suck. So I do like drafting in that way. And then it combines it basically with what people might be familiar with from The Mind, or another game called The Game, but we did review The Mind on this channel, where you have to put cards in ascending order or numerical order, right? And it's just that simple idea. I think combining those two, this fun, speedy mechanic of drafting with the limitation of what cards you can take because you have to put them in order. I think that makes it a really great filler game that, like I mentioned, I've been teaching to a lot of people. So that's why it's quite certain it had to be on this list at some point. Oh Hanami, my number 9.
Very nice. Still want all those flower petals, man.
Yeah, John got to play this recently too. And so you might see a review of this game coming soon on this channel. And so going on, our number 8.
Yeah, so moving on to number 8. You'll probably be very familiar with this game once I share it to everyone. We've talked about this many a time. It's shown up on our lists all over the place. That is The Crew, The Quest for Planet 9. So I'll say, especially this year, it was really great to play this game. So this game is a cooperative game. It is a trick-taking game, but it's cooperative, which is one of the pretty unique mechanics about this game. You can watch our review of this game if you want a lot more details on it. But I think this game, especially, I had a lot of fun where I've had a couple of experiences in which I got to play with other people who maybe have never played the game and so getting to introduce them to the trick-taking mechanics and working together in silence in trying to figure out and kind of complete the missions and the different objectives here. But I also got the experience of playing this game with my wife, and we played it as a 2-player where we actually had the AI playing as the 3rd player. So I actually got to try a different experience of the game where you have this kind of third open module this 3rd type in which one of the players kind of takes control of this AI and has to make decisions for how that hand is going to be played with limited information. It's not like you have 2 hands to play with, but it's one that's partially revealed. And then you still get to do the same game mechanics generally with the other players, but then everyone has a general shared information about this one, AI, but the captain is the one that makes the choices for how it goes. So it was a pretty fun way of playing it, but it also reminded me of just how much I enjoy this game and how much I enjoy trick taking, and also this concept of working together to these puzzles that get harder and harder and harder, and trying to understand how people think about the game and how we try to reach these objectives when you can't really communicate to each other. So always a solid experience. So it's a game that I actually still haven't gotten to the end of all 50 missions as of this point. And I know that there's a new version of The Crew that's come out. I think it's like sunken, it's a water version.
Yeah, Mission Deep
Sea or something. So I've heard that one has a lot of great kind of continuations of a lot of what's gone on in this game. So excited to try that one. But for the purposes of this, The Crew reaches my number 8.
No, that's a good choice. That is one that, spoiler, is not on my list. But one I did consider because I know it is one that I do remember playing a lot this past year, especially with relatives. I think it just hit harder when I first played it, right? And then kind of it's just kind of stayed around, which is a good sign. but then just didn't hit as hard as my other games on this list. But no, yeah, that's for sure a good choice. Especially, I would say it is maybe the game that is getting me into trick taking. You know, so nowadays when I like hear top 10 lists that mentions a different trick taking game or Kickstarters that are trick taking, I pay attention probably because of my experience with the crew. Yeah.
Very nice. Oh yes, and it was released in 2019, so just about 3 years ago. So,
and so my number 8 is on this list mainly because my experience toward the end of this past year, 2021, having it come to mind as a game like I wanted to try to teach as a new game to someone as a different kind of experience in board gaming. And then I remembered my cousin actually enjoyed it too. I think he actually has his own copy. And so I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's right. You have your copy. So you must like it too. So we had a whole group play it together. And that game is Mountains of Madness. Which actually, it kind of surprises me that it's on this list. But when I keep thinking back to that experience we had, are you trying to
keep going? You're good.
I'm trying to remember recall the experience I had with this, and it's just such a funny experience, like every time. It's just like, and that's really why it's on this list. Like, I think of all the games on my list, this is the one that makes me laugh the hardest. And I think that is just such a great trait in a game, that it's not a party game for one, which has like, you know, a lot of the social aspects and dependent on how social the people are that you're playing with for it to actually be fun or funny. Like the game mechanism itself of forcing you to go crazy or take madness cards, it's great. Yeah, I mean, just to give you an idea of the game, the whole mechanism or the game loop is essentially you're all traveling on this map together. It's a co-op game, traveling on this map together to basically fly your plane through these mountains, trying to basically collect research on the kind of alien gods in this mountain area and take that back to your university. That's the theme. But the way it plays out is you're going to be having each round of this real-time session of trying to play cards from your hand that match the symbols you need to finish that one round or that one mission. So it's really simple idea, just symbol matching in real time. But then the main kink in the system is while you guys are exploring, you're going to come across events that force you guys as players to kind of go more insane or mad. And so then there's these different decks of madness cards that you'll probably have to deal out, most likely always have to deal out to the players throughout the game, that then tell that player to behave a certain way when you guys are playing that real-time symbol matching portion of the game. And not to spoil too much, because I think part of the fun is getting to discover what those madness are. And only you can look at the card. Like, you don't want to show other people what it is, and so you kind of interpret it the best you can. But you know, it could be basic stuff as like, you can't talk when you guys are playing or trying to do that real-time matching session, or it can, you know, go to other things like to talk, you have to like look into someone's eyes, and only when you have eye contact can you talk. To then even crazier things of like actually getting out of your seat and doing stuff like when the round starts, like stand in the farthest corner of the room and you're like, what the frick are you doing? Because you obviously, again, you can't tell your teammate what is wrong with you. You just have to start doing it, and then they have to figure out like how to keep playing while you're acting so weird. So yeah, really funny stuff. Laughing so hard when you see some of the things that just people suddenly start doing. You're like, what is wrong with you? And so
yes. That's right, Ben. That's right.
So yes, sir. So yes, my number 8, because of just like how much of a funny and hilarious time it is. Mountains of Madness, which came out in 2017.
Mhm.
So going on to our number
Seven.
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 Oh yeah, good coordination. I even did the wrong number. Anyway, seven.
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 So for my number 7 game, this is contrary to these older games that I've been going to, now is one of the most recent games that I believe we played of release games. That game is Bullet Heart.
Oh yes.
Woo!
Yes.
Bullet Heart. So
I mean,
Bullet Heart, we've also
I don't know what this game is.
Yeah, never heard of this game, huh?
Yeah.
We've done a review of this game. Basically, it is a shoot 'em up puzzle game, puzzle action game, not to be confused with a just purely real-time game, but it does have real-time elements to the game as you play it. But effectively what you do is you play as one of these, one of the 8, I believe, avatars of this game, and it mimics and mirrors the shoot 'em up genre from video games, where basically you control a particular character. Usually you're flying through some form of a 2D scroller and you're like shooting up, you know, the people that you're fighting against, right? Usually it's like airplanes or spaceships and stuff like I think like Space Invaders style or Galaga. But basically in this game you get to take control of one of these 8 anime female characters, and you play, and each of them has their own unique skills and abilities that help them manipulate their board as you're playing through the game. So as you progress through the game, you're going to have these bullets that are coming at you, and each of the bullets, I believe there's 5 different colored and symboled bullets, and they'll have a number 1 through 4 on them. So when they come into your sights, they'll come down based on the numbers, and if at any point any of these bullets reach the bottom of your track, they will hit your character and you have a certain amount of life points. So that's kind of the nature of the game. So what you're doing is, as these bullets are entering into your sight, you'll have these patterns and you'll have these different abilities that will help you remove these bullets off of your sights, and you'll send those bullets over to your opponents so you can try to take them out. And so the main objective of the game is to be the last character standing out of all of the other characters. This is a great game, loved it. I've played 3 or 4 different characters at least, I believe, at this point in time. They all are very unique. They all have their own ways of playing. I think my personal favorite one is the music, actually, the music girl. She uses the colors and she'll use the way that they're on the board to help kind of reset certain bullets on her cue so that they can count for any kind of color. So it helps her to fulfill her patterns a lot better. And she has really great movement of her skills. So I love using that character. But they have a lot of other ones. They have like a origami girl who uses like origami things. There's one who's like a psychic, and she uses like mind powers of actually shifting the bullets to try to remove them. There's like the Russian girl who's just like has a lot of patterns and she's like super strong in that way. And then you have one with a gun, so she actually has sights to use. There's the baseball gangster girl, or yeah, baseball gangster. So all these really great characters. And the cool thing about Bullet is that they actually have expansions that have been coming out, or not expansions, but sort of expansions, but standalone add-ons that are going to be adding more characters in it. So there's, I think the new one releases Bullet Star, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And there's, I know there's more that this company is probably planning on releasing with this game. But this is my number 7.
Great choice. Game that I don't know about, but it sounds great.
Never heard of, right? Never heard of.
Yeah, and the first expansion I actually did get toward the end of last year that I've been wanting to try is 4 new characters in what's called Bullet Orange, which is actually an expansion that the company was able to do with an actual shoot 'em up video game company, like taking their characters and putting it into this Bullet board game. And then you mentioned Bullet Star, which I did pre-order, which is like the next standalone set that can also be combined with this one, but that has its owns I think 8 new characters. So just exciting to see how different the characters can be and still be in this kind of fun real-time system. So my number 7
Mhm.
is uh, a game that I finally got to try toward the end of last year too. Also, I feel like a lot of mine. No, I think the rest are not like that. But a lot of the games that came to mind were ones that I got to try toward the end of last year.
Mhm.
But this one, I was really pleasantly surprised by. That's why obviously it's my number 7. I got to play it a couple times so far, and I think just some of the things I realized about how it's designed really catches my attention, makes me want to try it more. But part of it is also the look. I think is great, and that game is Merchants of Magic. Look at that fantasy artwork. So yeah, I mean, the look is actually what caught my attention back when this was on, I think it was on Kickstarter. But actually what was being kickstarted was the main game in the series, because as you can see, this is called a set a watch tale. Basically, Set a Watch is an actual separate board game, and I think the main board game developed by this company. And then this is basically like a spin-off game that's a roll and write.
Mhm.
And so I thought it was kind of funny back then that this artwork is actually what caught my attention. And so I backed the project just to get this add-on, and I didn't get the actual or original game that was being funded. But I was pleasantly surprised by this because, yeah, this is a roll and write where you are all running your own shop. But then it looks so vibrant. Like maybe if you can see some of the pictures. And actually, I did an unboxing of this game. And so you can even see, check that video to see the stuff that comes in it. But I think like it's this theme where you're all a merchant running your own shop and you're rolling dice, and then the dice count as different resources. And the idea is you need to then assign those numbers or choose 2 out of the 4 dice each round to use, and basically consider having those resources and using them to then put into the development of, different pieces of armor like helmets or armor or weapons like swords and wands, or put it into researching different characteristics such as like fiery or shocking or of the elves or of the dragons, so that when certain items come through your shop, basically they're orders, people are trying to order specific items, you can fulfill those orders and get those points for it. You might have a card in front of you that's like shocking wand of the elves, and so you need to have had developed wands so your shop can make wands, and then also research shocking and of the elves so you know how to make those features onto an item, then you can fulfill that order.
Mhm.
And so I think it's really surprising how well this feels, because it sounds like, or at least to me, it came off before I played it as like, I thought it would just be another roll and write, like, okay, roll, mark things off on a sheet. If I get the things I need for the item, that's great. But there's a lot of these different columns that you can put your numbers into. And I think that's one of the things where it's like, okay, I'm not just limited to like in bingo, right? Like you're literally just trying to get a row. You have certain limitations on what numbers are needed for each item or thing, feature that you're researching.
Mhm.
For example, like a wand might need 2 different numbers. One of them has to be like greater than a 2 and the other one has to be greater than 6. So you have to see in which round will the die rolls be good enough for you to fulfill that. But then at the same time, once you finished developing or researching something, you get a potion, and potions in this game are just one-time use items to add 1 or -1 to a die result.
Mhm.
And so, then you can kind of plan ahead then, like, okay, maybe I'll put these dice on this round toward fulfilling this research, so I get a potion that can help me modify number in the next round. And so you can kind of start, escalating that way, cascading in how much you can get done. But I noticed, and I told this to my cousin after playing it, the game I think feels fun because it has that kind of splendor feel
Mhm.
where you are getting a little bit each time you're like applying a resource and marking something up on your sheet. But then once you reach a point that you can fulfill an item with what you've researched and developed. It's that same feeling as in Splendor, where you're kind of collecting gem cards and then those pay off later, right? They gradually build up so that it's easier to then get the next gem card. And similar in this one, like once I've developed swords, like that's basically one step done for any future sword I need to get. And so it has that kind of feeling of like, yeah, getting more and more at a faster pace. And I think that's what's kind of magical about it. And yeah, that's why I do want to play it more too. And so that is my number 7, Merchants of Magic, which came out last year.
Nice. Very nice.
And so going on to
our number 6. Sixer.
6.
Great. So my number 6 game is one that Ben will be happy to see on my list. It's a game that I've only tried once, actually, and I've only gotten to play once. But this game is Brass Birmingham.
Yes.
So
I mean,
yes.
I haven't heard of this one either.
So Brass Birmingham is actually extremely popular. It's actually one of the highest rated games of all time. It's consistently at the top of Board Game Geek, and across the board, people who've played this game love this game. This game, I think, was officially released back in 2018. It's a kind of spin-off of a different one, Brass Lancashire, right? If I remember correctly. Yeah. But basically what this game is about is that you are developing and building your network of industries in this industrial age of the Industrial Revolution in Birmingham. So effectively what you're doing in this game is you will be setting up and you're trying to develop your networks of connections between different cities or different areas within Birmingham, and you're developing your own kind of industry and infrastructure that you have of your own player tableau, and you're trying to add it into, you know, the location of Birmingham, into the different areas around the different cities, and you have to connect them with the different networks of 2 different phases, where it first starts off, I believe, with boats being the connecting points between the different locations, and then in the second age, or like at kind of the pivot, you have to shift over from utilizing boats to steam power by using rails and engines to connect your different locations to gain resources, to try to establish and build up your industry, so that by the end of the game, you can have the most victory points because you built the most established industry in Birmingham. It's a really, 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 really well-made game. There's a lot of variability. There's a lot of options that need to be done. And it's a lot of hand management, where you have a series of cards in your hand that allow you to do different things within the turn. But you have to always think about how do you use the cards from your hand, because every action that you take will require you to use at least 1 card out of your hand. So you have a certain amount of cards in your hand per round. And so you have to try to be the most effective and the most efficient with that set of cards that you're utilizing. Some of the things you can do is, again, building things to help you get your industry out into the space. You can develop that industry. You can grab resources. You can sell the resources so you can make more money, and you can set yourself up for more success, or you can take out loans because you need money to actually build things at times or be able to get things. And so if you like these Euro style strategy games, and if you like games like older school style games like Ticket to Ride, or other games that you have to kind of connect lines and places together like Power Grid, Brass Birmingham really kind of takes it and elevates it into next level. I've only played it once. We spent like 2.5 or 3 hours playing through the game. And it was at the point where my wife was like, hey, you guys need to eat dinner. Hold on, I'm finishing up my turn. I still need to figure this out, right? Where it really sucks you into it. And it is a lot. There is a lot of things going on with the game. But if you can get a handle of it and you really get the feel of it, it really is an awesome experience. And it definitely tells as to why it's such a highly rated game. And we only played with 2 players. I do feel like the experience would probably be even better if you had maybe 2 more players, probably like a 3 or 4 player experience, is probably where you get the real full experience of this game. But even playing as 2 players, there was still a lot of decisions that we had to make about how we were going to interfere with one another in our industries that we were building and trying to figure out what to do in the game.
Did you win?
I think I barely won because I think your final turn, you could have made a more efficient move that would have made you win, but you didn't. So, but yes, Brass Birmingham is my number 6 game.
And yeah, you're right. So Brass Birmingham, like you mentioned, did come out in 2018. And I think that was it was Kickstarted. So I did get mine on Kickstarter. And it is, like you mentioned, a kind of spin-off or kind of a little slightly more advanced game from Brass Lancashire. And Brass Lancashire itself, I think, was the re-implementation of just Brass, which came out much earlier. So it is kind of like these steps to getting to Brass Birmingham, the kind of most advanced, newest version. But yes, nice.
But that was my number 6.
My number 6 is a game that I believe we reviewed. I was trying to look it up while you're talking, but I believe we reviewed on this channel much earlier. And it's a game that I still enjoy the feeling of the deduction in it, because it just, once you can get the answer, you just feel so smart. And that game is Cryptid.
I did play with you. I have played with you.
Yeah. And we've reviewed it, right? Have we? I hope so. If not,
actually, I don't think we've actually reviewed this. I think we've talked about it a few times.
Okay.
I don't know if we've ever actually.
You should probably try to review it, because I mean, it's a simple game where you basically are always, there's a whole deck of cards, but you're always just choosing one to play with in any given session, because the card itself tells you how to set up the board, like where to put the board pieces, where to put all the landmarks. And the reason why that's important is because the card also then directs you to tell each player what clue they need to look up in their book, because every player knows one clue about where the cryptid or the monster is hidden on this board. So then the whole point of the game is this competitive deduction game where, with your one piece of information, you need to then, on your turn, ask one other player, your choice, a specific spot on the board, whether the cryptid, the monster, can be there. And they'll respond yes or no based on the information that they know, the one clue that they were given from the setup of that game. And so it's such a clean system where you just know one thing for sure about the monster's location, but then you need to then start thinking a little strategically of who should I ask to figure out the next piece of information of where the monster could be. Because then, based on how the board is set up and the pieces of information that each person is given, there is always only one place that the monster can be, which is also very, very surprising to learn about of this game. And people always question, like, is that really true? Because I don't think the rules actually say that, but I think I might have heard that, and I always tell people. But then when we kind of play through the game, reach the actual solution of like, okay, the monster was here, then we start wondering, like, wait, could the monster be in this spot? And it's like, oh no, that spot doesn't work for that person's clue. So it's like, I'm pretty sure that, every map set up in the game with the clues divvied out, there's always one solution only. And so that's very impressive. And then, like I mentioned, it's just so great once you reach the end. Like I like letting the players kind of, whoever's trying to solve the location of the monster, to, instead of asking just like each player, like, could the monster be here for you, I let them actually say, like, tell each player what their clue is or what they think each person's clue is, because that just makes you feel so smart once you've figured out so much ahead of everyone that, like, I knew exactly what your clue was. And so just that excitement, even though it's a game I've already been playing for a few years now, I still remember that feeling each time of getting to that point, or even racing with someone to that point. Like if I'm playing with someone who's played more, then we're kind of doing this dialogue throughout the game of like, I think I know his clue and her clue. And then the other player's like, yeah, I know their clues. He's like, oh shoot, are you like gonna get to the answer faster than me? And so, but yeah, just that kind of race and that cool feeling of knowing the answer so precisely
Yep.
is why
I found the Loch Ness monster first.
is why Cryptid is my number 6, and it came out in 2018. So I've been playing it for a few years now.
Very nice.
And so going on to our
number 5. Five. So my number 5 game is a game that actually Ben gave to me after he got rid of it himself, that he decided that he no longer wants to play, or he no longer wants to copy.
I'm guessing
And
it's not on my list.
past.
I'm guessing it's not on my list.
Definitely not going to be on his list. But I actually got the chance to do some solo versions of this game. So this one is specifically some solo experiences that I've had on my own, but one that I've really enjoyed and would like to kind of get back into kind of going forward, or seeing if there's others that would want to. And that game is Aeon's End.
Okay.
With the War Eternal expansion to it. But Aeon's End is a cooperative deck builder game where you're working together to defeat different monsters that you'll be fighting against in the scenarios that you set up for yourself. So in Aeon's End, the unique thing about this deck builder and this way that you play the game, there's kind of 2 major things. The first thing is that you are mages as you're playing through this game, or like these spellcasters. And the first thing that you have to do is you'll have certain spells that you're going to be using to try to deal damage or to activate to fight against the monsters that you're pitted against. But the unique thing is that you have to open these breaches, is what they're called, in order for you to actually cast the spells. Or you need to at least set the breaches so that it's ready to activate and you can put a spell onto it. And it's not that the spells get to be used right away, but you're setting up the spell so that in the following turns, you'll be able to activate them to do its effect or not. Right. So that's kind of the first kind of unique thing where you have to kind of prepare things and you have to plan ahead of what you want to do in the game. The other very unique thing about this, which kind of sets it aside from a lot of other deck builders in general, is that in this game, when you need to when you need to get your deck refreshed, in most deck builders, what you would do is you take your discard pile and you shuffle it and you put it back and you start drawing from it. In this game, what you do is you actually take your discard pile and you just flip it over, and then you just start drawing from the deck right then and there. It's very unique because in that way, it means that you can actually kind of prepare and plan exactly what is coming up in your next hands or in your oncoming hands, and prepare yourself and prepare your resources, your cards, to do the next things that you want to do. So that's a very unique thing, because in a lot of deck builders, there's a lot of elements of randomness when you have to reshuffle your deck. You don't know what's coming. You know generally what cards you have, but you don't really know the order. In this game, you actually are setting the order yourself. And it's actually very important because you may need to sometimes plan ahead and prepare of, oh, maybe if I use these cards in this order, what's going to happen is that I may not have enough resources in the next time my hands come up, because I know that I've stacked like 3 or 4 cards together. And that means that these cards are not going to come together. And I always want these cards in the same spot, right? Or like you want to have them at the same time. Or conversely, you can be like, well, it's not really working out the way that I planned, and you want to kind of shift it around and do other things. Right. So that's kind of the unique thing about this game. The other thing is that it has a large cast of characters as well. And each of the characters have their own unique skills and abilities as well. Some of them have, like heightened powers, but they have less areas in which they can cast spells in. Some of them are more useful in like healing. Some of them are more useful in being able to like help other players draw more cards or open up their breaches so that they can cast more spells quickly, things like that. So it has a lot of unique variability of how you may want to play the game. And of course, you also have the randomness, or kind of the way of always having different variances in the game of what kinds of cards you can buy per game session. And of course, you also have the villain differences of having a cast of different villains that have different, skills and abilities that they use to try to kill your characters off and try to destroy the town or destroy the world that you're trying to save. So Aeon's End War Eternal has we played it a long time ago, and then Ben was clearing out his collection, and so I ended up getting it from him, and so got to play it myself, try it out, and remembered how enjoyable it was as a cooperative experience playing together against this AI in a very difficult setting. But it's something that I would love to kind of go back to, and really enjoyed that experience playing solo, and kind of was thinking of how great it would be to have other players to work with to try to figure this out. So Aeon's End.
No, that's cool to hear that you actually got to play that. And like, because I wouldn't say it's a bad game. Like as you were saying, yeah, I was just clearing out my stuff. So, and I know you like deck builders than I do, but for the things you described, like, yeah, it is what caught my attention as like a very different deck builder. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that it didn't get as much attention as other deck builders around nowadays.
Exactly.
So yeah. And so my number 5 is a game that I played with a group of friends, I think maybe just once this past year, but one friend specifically, I think was like looking into some of the newer games that he wanted to try. And so I think he requested this one. And that game is Atlantis Rising. Atlantis Rising,
that's a great game.
Which I did play with Matthew. And to clarify, I think I did also play Root with Matthew. So don't be offended, Matthew. I remember much about that session now. You can believe me if you want to or not. But I did play this with Matthew because I'm pretty sure he requested it when looking into like seeing my collection for the first time, and then being like, okay, what are like the games we can try that I've heard so much about from like Dice Tower and stuff like that. And so this is Atlantis Rising 2nd edition. And I remember this was on Kickstarter. So this is like the Kickstarter version, but I heard the retail version is already like so nice anyway. And so I backed this because I had heard about the 1st edition a lot from the Dice Tower. Like I think when I was getting to board games, Atlantis Rising would show up in a lot of their top 10 lists as kind of like one of the great co-op games, aside from like Pandemic and stuff, one of the great co-op games, but like people maybe didn't talk much about it. And at this point, the 1st edition definitely looked really old, like the art style and stuff. But then Elf Creek Games did a reprint, a redone version with art by Vincent Dutrait. So it looks so gorgeous, this art style. And the whole idea of the game is it is a co-op game where you are all Atlanteans and Atlantis is sinking, as we all know. And so you're trying to research the technology you need to basically teleport out the Atlanteans civilization before you all die with the sinking of Atlantis. And I was even just thinking about this game today on how much I do want to try it again. I don't think I've lost at this game. So that isn't to say it's easy, but I think I maybe just got kind of lucky or had some smarter people that I was playing with, or I mean, obviously you can make it harder, which I don't think I ever did. And so maybe that's what I need to do. But each time I also didn't win by like a lot. It kind of always comes down to this feeling of like, you know, you're struggling for most of the game. And then at the end, it's kind of, for me, when I won, it's been those cases where like, okay, we have plenty of resources to win on this last turn. But getting to that point is always kind of nerve-wracking because the whole setup is you have this board of Atlantis that is actually divided into a lot of pieces, because it's supposed to replicate this visually, this idea of Atlantis sinking, where the outer pieces of the island will sink first until the middle. And why that it matters to you is because each section of this Atlantis island, you would send workers, so it is a worker placement game. You're sending your workers to try to get certain resources at each of these sections, but your chances of getting more resources are higher toward the farther pieces of the island. But those are the pieces that the locations that sink first. And so it has that push your luck to it where it's like, do I want to go further out so I can gather more gold this round? But then there's a chance that that could be the piece that sinks and I get nothing, right? So maybe I should go a little more inland where it's a little more risky, like with the die roll to get the resource, but at least I probably won't lose my worker this round. And so, and then you also have variable player powers. So you have like a leader character who then has their own player board that gives you a certain power. And then it's cooperative. So it has all these things I really like about the game. But yeah, just so you know, yeah, it is this cooperative, push your luck, resource management kind of game. And so yeah, Atlantis Rising, it feels great. It feels like a really good next step if you've already played games like Pandemic and kind of gotten what you want out of that. And I think another good part about it is that you're all playing at the same time. So it's not like a lot of those earlier co-op games where you take one turn and then the next player does their number of actions. Everyone can discuss and say like, okay, I'm going to send my worker here and I'm going to send them here. Where you're going to send your workers, you send all your workers, and then you individually just resolve whatever your workers are doing in those locations at the same time as other players. So there isn't that much downtime to what you're actually doing throughout the game. And so, yeah, my number 5, Atlantis Rising 2nd edition. For sure, get the one by Elf Creek Games because I'm pretty sure that's the only one that's available now. But it just looks amazing, as you could see. And even the components in it, and very well upgraded.
Nice. Yeah, we got to save those Atlanteans again sometime soon. It's been too long.
Oh, so such a gorgeous game.
Nice. All right, moving on to our number 4.
Number 4.
Getting to the top. Let's see what's next. So my number 4 game is one that I actually only played once this last year, though I played it a lot before last year. But it was great to get back into and kind of has me raring for it again, is Gloomhaven.
Wow.
My number 4. So
big game.
Big heavy game. Gloomhaven is a cooperative game. It basically is kind of think of it as a D&D light, where Dungeons and Dragons light game, where what you're doing is you play as new adventurers in the town of Gloomhaven. And as you play through the game, you effectively have a campaign that you're going to be playing through with a bunch of different scenarios and situations that you and whatever party of players that you have will be going through and choosing, doing different scenarios and choosing actions and outcomes that will happen based on the completion of those scenarios. So the really unique and cool thing about this game is that your decisions actually do matter, in the sense that when you make official decisions in this game, it will set the course of the kinds of scenarios and the kinds of situations you can get into later, and it'll actually lock you out of other actions and other experiences as you play through the game. In addition, there's also a lot of ways of unlocking new characters, additional characters, and also ways of even retiring your characters so that you can play as a different, as a different traveler or a different character in this space. It's also great because you can also have people come in and out of your sessions. So you can have people save up their party, or like maybe one game session you play with some people, the next game session you have maybe one of the same people, but other people drop out. And this game actually scales itself according to the number of players and to the levels of your characters in the game. So that's also a really cool and unique thing about this, where if you really want to push through a campaign, you don't necessarily have to have all of the same players playing with you the whole time. You could choose to continue pushing forward by yourself, or having people come in and out of the party, in the same sense of sometimes how adventuring works, right? In these fantasy settings and in these games, sometimes if you play D&D, sometimes you even have these settings in which you're not always with the same party, or you're not always with the same group of people. So getting back into it. So as I said, I actually only played it once last year again, because I was playing with my brother, who we had a campaign running 2 years ago, and we had been pushing we've been pushing through a number of the scenarios, and then we just stopped. So then we got back into it sometime last year. We just played a session and it took us a little bit to remember, but it actually was pretty intuitive enough that we were able to recall exactly what was happening and pull up all of our character stats, all the items and all the things together, and then just kind of run again as where we had last left off. And it really is a pretty interesting game of what situations, what scenarios, and the choices you have to make that can kind of really set the stage of the game. So Gloomhaven being in my top 4, number 4 game. Yeah, love it. Want to get back into it again. So
I remember telling you about Jaws of the Lion, which then I did get when that came out as kind of like a simplified, cleaner way to play Gloomhaven, which I still haven't gotten to try though. So, but yes,
do it.
Gloomhaven, it is definitely well known in the industry at this point, and yeah, something I should try out.
And I think the new one is coming out pretty soon. If it hasn't,
Frosthaven,
so.
yeah, which I've been hearing people kind of saying they're wondering what'll happen to Gloomhaven on all these lists once Frosthaven comes out.
Probably dropped out, replaced with a new and improved, but we'll see.
So my number 4 is a game, I think it's the one that I had mentioned at the very beginning of this video of playing it a lot actually, but that doesn't make it my number 1. But I think it is the game I played the most in 2021. And I even kind of quickly looked up and I played it at least 50 times because I had a period where I really got into playing it solo, just trying it out, really kind of going the distance of the game, not just like trying out the base game, but kind of a bunch of the expansions that came after. It's a game that we reviewed pretty recently, and that is Marvel Champions. And so Marvel Champions is a cooperative game where you all play as heroes in the Marvel universe fighting against villains. And the game at this point has a whole bunch of hero packs of basically adding new heroes you can play as, new cards you can customize your decks with, and then also other scenario packs, which then introduce more villains and schemes. And so you can watch our recent review on this, which is ended up being more lengthy than I expected. And I'm saying that even after we've tried to cut down our video lengths to have like the shorter video and kind of the detailed video, but the detailed one went even longer with all the good things we were saying about the game. And so I'm not going to repeat all of it here, but I think really thinking about this list and how much I got into Marvel Champions, and even recently, like when I've been going to game shops and just seeing like new hero packs, it gets me thinking like, should I try this new hero now? Like, I feel like it's gonna happen at some point though, like when I'm back into that mode again, I'm gonna want to try the new heroes, because yeah, the heroes feel very different from each other. The game ultimately plays it's a living card game by Fantasy Flight, basically meaning a game that has these expansions that you can add to the game, but not booster packs, so not randomized cards that you're trying to collect. It's just you buy whatever new pack, new hero you want to play as, you get a deck that is ready for you to play with. But then if you want, you can even customize it by changing out kind of the aspect, basically whether you have aggressive cards or defensive cards with the character. You can customize your decks that way depending on the villain you're fighting. So it has that stuff going with it where it's easy to kind of just choose the hero that you want to play as, but for people who want to go the distance can enjoy the process of kind of building their deck out specifically for fighting different villains. Of course, Marvel is a huge IP all these years. And so if you're into that, and it's good that it's drawing from like the comics, so it's not just like what people might know from the MCU and those movies, right? It's really drawing from the source material. So if you're kind of curious about that, this is a way to also then kind of learn about the characters, the actual things they can do, or their actual villains and stuff that they encounter. But yeah, it's a great system. It has a lot of small details to it that can kind of get a little complicated, like with timing wise of certain cards. but the overall system of needing to discard cards from your hand to generate resources to pay for the other cards in your hand, it just constantly creates those difficult choices. And then that's even separate from how difficult the villains can be with them scheming and their own special abilities that make them feel different and making you have to approach it differently or time things differently, coordinate differently with whoever you're playing with. Yeah, it's really great, really solid. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend it if you are curious in this IP or even trying one of the very successful living card games by Fantasy Flight. So my number 4, Marvel Champions.
Very nice. Very nice.
And so on to
number 3.
Number 3.
So,
3.
my number 3 is a little bit of an older game, not super old, but older. And that game is Viticulture, the Essential Edition. I've gotten to play this game a few times with my wife now. We've done a lot of the 2-player game of this, but Viticulture is just a really solid, great game. Love playing this every single time I pull it out. I'm like, oh yes, this feels good to play again. Viticulture is a worker placement game. Effectively, what you're doing is you are in Tuscany, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to build out your viticulture. You're trying to develop your vineyards and sell wine and build and make wines and sell it out and try to make the most successful viticulture and be the most famous wine growers and grape growers and winemakers around. And so this game is the Essential Edition is kind of broken out into 2 sections, or is the game is broken out into kind of 2 major phases, which is the summertime and the wintertime, in which you are using these workers to do different activities during those seasons. So in the summer season, there's only a certain amount of actions that are allowed to be done. And in the winter, there's only a certain amount of actions that are allowed to be done. And you only have a certain amount of workers. And so when you send these workers out to do these different actions, maybe it's building, maybe it's planting, to create, to planting your vines to prepare for growing grapes, whether it's harvesting, each of these, or whether it's winemaking itself, they're all kind of situated in these different places. And the unique thing of being a worker placement is that once those slots are taken for a particular action, no other player is allowed to use their workers in that spot. But the nice thing about the Essential Edition that's different than the base version is that it adds in a few extra rules that are not part of the original game that, well, now that it's called the Essential Edition, kind of adds on more characteristics that, for example, allow all the players to start off with this grande worker, which allows them to go do any single action within the season, even if all of the worker spots are taken. So then you don't feel completely blocked out of activities or things that you really want to try to do in the game, but you only have one of them. So you still have to be very careful, and you have to be very strategic about whether you want to use them or not in this particular way. But it does give you a little bit more freedom in your choices. And I think there's a couple other changes. I've never actually played the original version without the Essential Edition, but just knowing that the Essential Edition adds in these kind of quality of life changes that really help make the experience feel a lot better, which is why they effectively only sell this version out now versus the original version without the essential aspects. But yeah, I love Viticulture. It's one of those games that, even though it's pretty competitive, feels like you can kind of take your own pacing at it. It feels like you are somebody who's like growing your grapes or kind of building up your space. And while you are kind of slowly developing your engine and your ability of growing your grapes, creating wines, fulfilling wine orders, it has this kind of laid back feeling, despite it being a competitive game, that gives us this really fun, or this really soothing feeling, yet also kind of being a little bit cutthroat, where you're really trying to beat your opponents out by getting the most points at the end of the game by, in that way. And the also really great thing about this game too is that there are so many different ways of achieving your success that it gives players different options that, you don't have to follow the same path that somebody else is doing to win the game. There's a lot of different variances of how you can develop your lands, where it could be like you're selling a lot and you're trying to do a lot of touring where you can kind of build up your infrastructure, or you just focus on, I'm just going to be planting and I'm just going to be making a bunch of grapes, and then we're just going to make wine and then we'll see what happens from there. Or you could be one that does a lot of like tour, like getting a lot of visitor cards and hoping that the visitors that come will be able to benefit you in the long run and stuff like that. So it gives you a lot of options, a lot of variability, and that's what makes the game really great from my perspective. And that's why it is my number 3.
Yeah, it's Viticulture. We do have a review of that game, which is, and it was one of our earlier reviews too. So you can check that out. But yeah, Viticulture is one of my top games. I would say it's not, I will say it's not on this list just because I didn't play it last year, I think, which is actually a little surprising to me. But yeah, I just didn't play it. But if I did, it would probably be on this list somewhere. And I think something to point out too is as a worker placement game, I think it is one that is unique in the sense that a lot of worker placement games have the idea of competing for the spaces you want to send your workers to. But then in Viticulture, because of the seasons, you kind of have to like budget your workers, right? You can't just send all of them out on this one round, because once you sent them all out in summer, you won't have them for winter, and you don't get them until next year. And so I think that is something about the worker placement in Viticulture that's different from almost all other worker placement games. It has that kind of pacing out your worker placement. So yeah, for those of you who are curious in a really good worker placement game, yeah, check out Viticulture. And so my number 3 is a crossover with John.
Da, da, da. Starting the crossovers.
And I think you can kind of guess what my top ones are if they're crossovers. This one, yeah, John mentioned I have I do kind of have a soft spot for real-time games. And anime art. So what about a game that has both? Bullet Art. I love this game. And like I keep thinking there are times like with like other games where I think about how, you know, maybe I like certain mechanics in it, or like the art or components, but then like maybe the gameplay loop is something that I lose interest in over time, right? And I think for Bullet, the gameplay loop is something that's very obvious, right? It's not like a heavy strategy game where you can think different paths like you were saying with Viticulture. It is the same loop that you just need to survive each round, clearing bullets enough so that you don't die before other people. And it's always going to be increasing in intensity at the same rate, right? You're just always going to be introducing more bullets to the whole system each round. But I just love that tension of knowing that, okay, I made it past this round, or it might even be like that round was so easy. But then at any moment you could just be like, you sent me so many bullets. Oh, this round is going to be terrible. Like, what the heck? You know, it's just like the way it escalates, cranks up, as predictable as it is. It's just so fun to be in that moment of the real-time playing of, okay, I got to do my puzzle, and I really got to do well this time because it's going to get worse and worse, you know? And then, of course, what you mentioned, like the different characters you can be and how different they feel in the same system. We do have a review of this game, so you can check that out. But yeah, those are kind of the things I love about it, and the art style definitely makes it stand out. Like I mentioned, I've already got the other expansion, the first expansion, and then pre-ordered the standalone expansion coming probably late this year. But yeah, it's just exciting to see what they're still going to do in making the characters feel different, but then still that fun of the real time competing with each other. Yeah, so my number 3, Bullet Hearts. Love it.
Heart.
So,
but yes, moving on number 2.
Number 2.
So my number 2 is a game that you've never seen before. Just kidding. You
I
totally
haven't
saw
seen
this.
before.
No, it is a game that never seen before on this channel. Just kidding. This game is Marvel Champions
Oh,
crossover.
nice.
Ben's
Oh,
already talked about this again, but I think, as we said, cooperative LCG, living card game. I think this game really has a lot of great potential as being a cooperative game in which everyone gets to play these different heroes, superheroes, being very unique from one another in what you can do. I think the mechanics Ben kind of mentioned, but I think it's really cool about the fact that you have to fight your villains, but the villains aren't so one note that you're just fighting the life points. So in a lot of these traditional or a lot of these cooperative games in which you're fighting against an actual villain that has hit points or a life total, that's really the only thing you typically tend to fight against, unless there's a unique mechanic to maybe certain kinds. The nature of most games is that's all you do. In this game, I think it's really cool about the fact that they actually add in this scheme section where it's the villain and they have a scheme, and that ultimately you have to beat the villain. You do have to defeat the villain, but there is a side tracker of the scheme that's going on that a villain is aiming for that will let the villain win if they actually get to it, which I think is definitely a different way of this approach of ways of losing as heroes, but it also is kind of fitting to this thematic idea of, in the Marvel universe, especially, that a villain's not just this villain that just sits out there and just beats up the heroes. The villains also have some kind of thing that they're aiming for and they're trying to do, and maybe it'll help them get stronger. But if they ever get to a certain point of their scheme succeeding, the heroes will lose because they failed to prevent the villain achieving their true objective. So for those of you who don't know a lot about the comic series and the world and stuff, just think of Avengers Infinity War. What happened in that movie is Thanos, the villain, they were fighting against him, they beat him in some spots, they beat different people here and there, but in the end of that movie, he reached his objective. So in that movie, he actually wins and the heroes lose, right? So that's kind of this feeling that you get in this game of the potential of that happening in this game too. And I love that kind of feeling where the stakes are really high, not just because the villain has too many life points and you can't beat him up, but it's like you might be actually doing really well at beating him up, but if you forget about his scheme, you might still lose the game. Right. So it's this kind of balancing act of what do you do as heroes? Do you spend time beating up the villain and letting the scheme move forward? Or do you have to deal with the scheme, but then the villain gets away and he can recover or something like that? So I love that dynamic. And Ben also mentioned with I haven't gotten into the deepness of kind of playing with the different aspects of the heroes, but even just playing as these heroes, you do get the feelings of all of the different kind of unique abilities and skills that they have and feeling like you're playing like these heroes. And the other cool thing that I don't think we mentioned is the fact that you even switch between your hero mode and your alter ego form, because you know that these heroes aren't just walking around in their tights all the time. Sometimes they have to go back to their alter ego alias kind of human mode or non-hero mode and have to figure things out themselves that way too, which is also part of the conflict. So Marvel Champions in my top list. I played it some with Ben. I played some with my family on our tabletop simulators, and it's always been a great experience playing through this. And this is one that is always kind of on my mind of when's the next time we can get into this. So
clarification though, you described Thanos as a villain.
Oh yes, actually, I mean, but
yeah.
We won't hash that out. That we'll save that for a Marvel podcast.
I don't think you should talk about your
boy Thanos,
your role model that way.
Boy.
Okay, yeah, no, good. That was. I'm surprised that it is this high for you though. But yeah, no, that's good. That's good to hear.
Yep.
So my number 2 is a game that I realized actually over the years, because it came out in 2014 and it was a big deal when it came out. And I think there's still people who really like it. But for me, I think it's a game that I don't actually talk about or mention to people as much as I like it. But then when I actually decide to introduce a group to it, because I do think it's not like a gateway game. It is a little heavier, but it's not quite like a medium game. I wouldn't say it's that much that you need to get into it. but whenever I get to play it and show it to a group, I'm like, man, I miss this game. I miss like it looks great. I think it actually looks really great. But then yeah, I miss like trying this game with all these different things going on. And that game is Five Tribes.
Mhm.
You have played this, right?
Once,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
long time ago.
Because I remember the warning that, and I think a lot of people in the board game industry kind of have a sense too with this game that there's always the warning of like the AP or analysis paralysis with this game, because the whole setup of the game is you're laying out the whole board of tiles, and on each tile you're putting these meeples, and it's basically a Mancala system where you can choose any tile, you pick up all the meeples and you drop them off one at a time in the direction that you want to move, and then whatever tile you put the last one on is where you do your action. And so this Mancala system though is kind of what people would point out as being like a bunch of options, right? Because you could choose any, I think the whole grid is like a 5x6, so maybe like 30 tiles I think you can choose from the beginning, and then you can pick up the meeples and move in any direction you want, not even like a straight line or anything, just, you know, maybe I'll go left one space, down one space, left one space, you know, with however many meeples you picked up from the initial space. And so when people hear that or hear the rules for that, it's like, yeah, you could easily spend so much time thinking through like which is the best spot for me to pick, and then from that one, which directions am I going to go, and which is the best space to end up on, you know. But I think when I've kind of taught the game to people and just given them the kind of caveat of like, you know, just don't think too much about it and just kind of see how it'll play out, I think that really helps with every group I've played it with, of just kind of, yeah, let's just really see how it goes, because there are other things happening in the game, right? There's the bidding at the start of each round to bid on turn order, because ultimately your money is your points at the end of the game. So it's kind of like, how many points do I want to spend? Because I think I need to do my move first, right? And then there's the move itself, but then there's also buying djinns or genies, which give you other abilities. And then there's also collecting goods that get traded in for money at the end of the game ultimately. And so there's that set collection. And so there's these different aspects going on. So I always kind of encourage people not to just focus too much or get bogged down by how many options you have of moving your meeples. Just choose something to focus on and try to do it and see how well you can do that. And then that way you learn the game, then can come back and start kind of thinking a little more on it. But yeah, I think like I really like this, like the artwork with this, the color scheme, and then yeah, this is probably the only game that I play with that kind of Mancala system that is still cool to kind of think through a bit, because you can obviously think it through, but then messed up on the turn order bidding and someone takes your move. And you're like, come on, out of like 20 spaces, you just had to choose the meeples that I wanted to use on this turn. That sucks, you know? But then there's the genies, which I think are cool, the djinns, which give pretty powerful abilities if you can buy them. And so it's just like these different ways you can kind of go about winning. And it's a pretty different game from other ones I usually play. And so, yeah, I think it's great. I love getting to teach it to people, and yeah, I need to tell people about this game more. I need to talk about it more, but it did get a lot of attention when it first came out. So, but yeah, I think among my friends though, a lot of people don't know about it. So I should probably teach it to people more.
Spread the word.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's my number 2, Five Tribes.
Nice. And now the final
number one. Number one.
Number one game. So this will probably come as no surprise for all of those who know me, but my number one game played this year, or this last year, is a game that I finally got Ben to play for the first time last year. Of course, Ben is
not on my list.
Not on his list at all. But my number one game is Spirit Island.
Of course.
Man, such a good game. And I think it's also especially great this year because it wasn't just me playing a bunch of solo games, which I had done a lot in the past as well, but I've actually gotten to introduce it to actually quite a number of people at this point in time. We had a few friends who I got to play. We played about, I think in total 3 or 4 times now throughout the last year. I got Ben to play it for the first time finally after like 4 years of pushing him on this, having my own set and finally making him play. And then I also got my brothers to play it with me. And I even had my wife play with me one of those rounds to play this game too. Spirit Island is a cooperative game. It's basically Anti-Settlers, the board game, which is you play as these spirits of this island, and you're basically trying to drive out the colonists and the invaders away from your island by utilizing your powers as the deities of this island, in either combination in support of the locals of the land, the Dahan, or maybe not necessarily fully supporting them because you are these spirits. And so sometimes your destructive natures and powers sometimes come at the detriment of the natives, but all at the expense of trying to ensure that the invaders leave your island. You basically are terrorizing them until they no longer want to settle and stay on this island. I love this game. It has so much strategy and consideration of what you need to do to try to protect your island. You have to make a lot of very difficult choices of what is in the best interest of how I should use my powers and how should I grow my presence on the island in order for me to ensure that the invaders are not able to continue spreading to the point in which they pollute the land so much that they destroy the islands, is effectively the idea, where they destroy the locals and they destroy your presence on this island. I really like this game a lot because each of the spirits also play pretty uniquely from one another. They all have their own unique mechanics and their skills. Some play as like there's some of the base spirits, which is like the river spirit, the earth spirit, the lightning spirit, and like kind of like this darkness spirit. But then they also have, especially with the new expansions that have been coming out since then, they have some pretty unique, characters, where one is the ocean spirit, where literally their presence can only sit close to the oceans and the coastlines. One is a true terror nightmare spirit that can't actually kill people or like destroy the invaders, but what it does is it causes a lot of fear in them. One is a kind of like a local spirit, like the local thunder speaker spirit, which actually moves around with the locals because it's kind of the tribe's, special, kind of shaman that leads their people to glory and greatness and stuff like that. And that's where, as you play the game, these spirits synergize with one another in order to kind of balance off the pros and cons or the strengths and weaknesses of each other to try to remove these invaders. And then the other great part about it too is it's not just the spirits that are unique, but even the invaders have their own unique skills and sets that you can play with as you get more familiar with the game that allow them to do better expansions or ways of adjusting the invaders that it's more difficult to remove them, or they spread in ways that develop their, win conditions. And I love that about this game because there's so much replayability and there's so many options. And it's also that as a cooperative game, what can tend to happen in a lot of other cooperative games is that a certain person or type of player like myself can tend to take over or try to force other players or kind of tell other players what they should do with their turns. But in this game, because there's so many complex activities going on and different skills and abilities that all the spirits have and all the things that are going on in the island, that it really does come down to each player having to communicate with each other, but having to make their own decisions about how am I, as the spirit that I am, going to do what I can do to help make sure that we protect this island as best as possible, where every player really has to be invested and involved with the game to make the choices, and you can see the repercussions of your choices throughout. So I love this game. I always still try to push it. I still am going to try to push Ben to like this game, but I know it's never going to happen. But I'm going to do it anyway.
While you've been talking about it, I'm just like, I don't know if I should say anything about this game, or I just have no comment about this game.
You can comment. You can bash on it.
It's not on my list, people. Just just know that it clearly is not on my list. I'm telling you, it's not my number one that I played
Definitely
last
not
year.
his list, but it's fine.
I'm just I never it never hooked me, but I
Mhm.
know obviously playing with you guys that time, there's definitely a group of you, and I mean actually probably a lot of the board game geek community, because it's always been highly ranked now, right? It's
Mhm.
definitely been going up these past years,
Yep.
even into like the top 10 now.
Into the top 10. It's dropped down since then, but
Yeah.
this is actually one of those unique games that it came out in 2017. And I believe actually in its initial release and early release, it was not actually rated very high. It was
Mhm.
rated in like maybe the mid 40s or something. But over time, it's actually climbed up in the ranks up into now I think it's in the top 20 now at this
Mm.
point, but it actually elevated over time as I think
Yeah,
more and more
yeah,
people
and that's
learned
the
about it
thing,
and
like
started
I
playing.
don't, oh man,
So
I don't get it,
there's
but
very few games that have done this kind of
people
like
are
low to
liking
high.
it, so that's
So
why maybe I should not say anything
bang,
about
bang,
it.
bang, bang. No, it's fine. It's not everyone's cup of tea, right? I mean, and as we've talked about it in a review here and there are certain things that maybe could be done better in the game in terms of components and development. But with the concept for me as what the game does and what it tries or what it is doing, I really think it hits something that I feel like a lot of the cooperative board games I've been looking for, of this uniqueness of all the different characters and different players, and also the uniqueness of allowing players to really make their own decisions for themselves versus what tends to happen in other cooperative games where sometimes it feels like only one person ends up really driving the game, or a particular player or two players are the only ones that drive it. Or in this game, you have to have all of the players working together. Otherwise, it will not work out for your island.
Mhm, mhm.
So, yeah. Spirit Island, number one. Yeah.
So my number one, not Spirit Island,
Not Spirit Island. I know that for sure.
is actually a crossover. So I think this
Mhm.
is our third crossover,
Yep. Yep.
right? Because we had Bullet Heart
Bullet
and Marvel
and Marvel
Champions,
Champions.
and so actually can you guess what this would be for me
I
as a
have a
crossover?
very good guess. It's probably Brass Birmingham, but
It is Brass
yeah,
Birmingham.
I knew it. I knew it.
Brass Birmingham. Oh gosh, this game. So like when I was thinking about why this game is so high on the list, I think it really is like thinking back over this past year, even that one time we played, I think that was the only time I got to play it this past year. And yet it is number one for me, which is surprising. But again, like I was saying, I think it's because of that feeling I've described with a few of the other games on this list. Like I think like Five Tribes, and even like Roots, like, you know, when it's like set up and we're kind of playing it, I'm like, oh, I missed this game, you know, like it feels good to like get into this game. Like with Brass Birmingham, I think like I get that excitement just thinking about playing the game, you know, like not even setting it up, because setting it up is actually like kind of a slog, right?
Yep. Yep.
But just thinking about it, like, oh man, the choices and how different this game feels from a lot of Euro games I've played, with like the income track. I think that's like such a cool idea where you have to both keep track of income and your victory points as separate things, right? And then also like the how much money you spend to build up your industry on your turn in that round determines like the turn order. So there's just interesting planning like that, and then the limitations on the board of like the way the routes can be built, and the specific kind of productions that can be built in each city.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh. And then that's not even talking about like the production of the game, where like it has this kind of dark industrial look, but it is not just like dark old looking board game art, right? Like it's really like fresh looking art for that time period.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the different kinds of resources you have to keep track of like the coal and the iron and beer in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just a lot going on, so it is like a heavier game, and so that's why I haven't been able to play it a lot. Not that many people I can just immediately teach it to, but when I get to like finally got to teach it to John, I was like, dude, this game, like getting, and it's like, for me, I was even thinking today, it's kind of that level of a medium game that I can like handle and enjoy a lot, like I think I would like to say I'm a medium gamer, but I think I actually can't like play that many medium games that much. But this is one where like I am willing to like spend the time, the 2-3 hours that we did just to learn and play it that one time. Like I can really get into it and just try to really do your best. And so yeah, Brass Birmingham, really definitely a game I still want to play a lot more at different player counts just to see the different things you can try to do. Because I think a lot of the strategy is like you can have different plans and even get in people's way, but I think it's such a game where you're developing so much that it can be hard to see like exactly a clear way to do better than everyone, And so I think that's kind of what's really cool about it. It is this heavy strategy game where then you can do your best to plan, but you still can't just like get everything right, And so you kind of have to do your best and then see what you can do with what you get each step of the way. And so, yeah, my number one game played in 2021, Brass Birmingham. Oh yeah, and the production with the clay chips in the version I have, the deluxe version or the Kickstarter version. It feels so nice and looks so nice when you're playing it for a Euro game.
Nice.
So yeah, so those are our top 10 games played in 2021. Woo! If you are interested in getting any of these games and would like to support this channel, please consider getting the games through Amazon and the Amazon links that I'll include in the description below. But yeah, hope this list has been interesting, entertaining for you guys. Hopefully, yeah, it's games that you also want to try yourselves. And for our friends who are watching this, if any of these caught your attention, let us know so we can actually play them with you in 2022 and maybe have them show up in the list next year.
Yeah, just saying, I'd love to put Root on my list sometime.
Oh,
never been able to.
Yeah,
so.
One of our friends who has Root, you guys can contact John.
Well, you don't even.
Oh yeah, you have it now.
I have my own copy, so if you
man,
want to play it, I'm here.
Even fewer ways to stop you from playing.
Even better.
But anyways, thank you for watching. Hope you found this interesting, helpful. If you did, please consider subscribing to this channel and following us on Instagram at I Got Board Game, sharing this video with people you play board games with, friends and family. And until next time, we will see you then. Bye.